I need to write this down while the details are still fresh, even though part of me wants to forget the whole thing ever happened. This was New Year's Eve 2023, and I was living in Denver at the time, working as a software engineer for a startup downtown. I've always been someone who enjoys solitude. My coworkers never understood why I'd skip happy hours or turn down party invitations, but I genuinely prefer being alone. So when New Year's Eve rolled around and everyone was making plans to hit clubs or attend house parties, I decided to do what I do best: go for a long night hike in the mountains. I know how that sounds. Who goes hiking alone on New Year's Eve in the middle of winter? But I'd done it before. There's something incredible about being in the wilderness when everyone else is crammed into bars and living rooms. The silence, the stars, the sense of having the entire world to yourself. I'd hiked the trail near Mount Falcon countless times. I knew every turn, every landmark, every steep section. Even in winter, even at night, I felt completely comfortable there. I left my apartment around 9 p.m., drove the 40 minutes to the trailhead, and started hiking around 10. The temperature was hovering around 20 degrees, but I was dressed for it. Thermal layers, heavy jacket, good boots. My headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar path ahead. The snow was packed down from other hikers earlier in the day, making the going relatively easy. The plan was simple: hike to the summit, which takes about 90 minutes, watch the city lights at midnight, then head back down. I had my phone fully charged, a backup battery, water, snacks. I'd done this hike so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. For the first hour, everything was perfect. The night was clear, stars were brilliant, and I had the trail completely to myself. I passed the first landmark, a distinctive split boulder, right on schedule. The second landmark, an old wooden bridge over a frozen creek, appeared exactly when I expected it. I was making good time. That's when I first noticed the footprints. They were in the snow just off the main trail, leading into the trees. Fresh prints, the snow around them still powdery and undisturbed. Someone had walked off the path recently, within the last hour or so. That wasn't unusual. People step off trail all the time for various reasons. What was unusual was that the prints didn't come back. They just led into the darkness between the trees and disappeared. I stopped and examined them with my headlamp. They were boot prints, larger than mine, with a distinctive tread pattern. I could see where the person had stepped, the depth of each print suggesting someone heavy, probably male. But there was something odd about the spacing. The steps were too far apart, like the person had been taking unnaturally long strides or jumping between steps. I looked into the trees where the prints led. My headlamp beam couldn't penetrate very far into the darkness. The forest was dense there, full of shadows. I called out, asking if anyone was there, if they needed help. The words felt strange leaving my mouth, breaking the silence I'd been enjoying. No response came, just the slight whisper of wind through pine branches. I continued hiking. The prints bothered me, but people do weird things in the wilderness. Maybe someone had gone off to relieve themselves, or was looking for a shortcut, or had simply wandered off trail and found another way back. I pushed the thought from my mind and focused on the path ahead. 10 minutes later, I saw them again. More prints, leading off the trail on the opposite side this time. Same boot pattern, same unnaturally long stride. But these ones were different. These prints approached the trail from the forest, crossed it, and disappeared back into the trees on the other side. Like someone had been running parallel to the trail, crossed over, and continued running on the other side. My pace slowed. I swept my headlamp back and forth, looking into the trees on both sides. Nothing. No movement, no sounds except the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Those prints crossed the trail at a section I'd passed maybe 3 minutes ago. If someone had crossed there, they were now ahead of me, somewhere in the darkness. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 11:17 p.m. I was about 30 minutes from the summit. I stood there, breathing hard, watching the white clouds of my breath dissipate in my headlamp beam. Every logical part of my brain said to turn back. But I'd never not completed a hike before. I'd never let fear make my decisions for me. And I was so close to the summit. I kept going. But now I was moving faster, and I was checking behind me every few minutes. The trail wound upward through a series of switchbacks, the trees thinning as I gained elevation. My headlamp created a small bubble of light around me, but beyond that bubble was absolute darkness. Anything could be out there. Anyone. The prints appeared 3 more times. Each time, they crossed the trail at different angles, coming from one side of the forest and disappearing into the other. Each time, the stride length seemed to increase. By the 5th set of prints, the spacing between steps was easily 6 feet apart. No human walks like that. No human runs like that. I was breathing harder now, and not just from exertion. My heart was hammering in my chest. Part of me wanted to run back down the trail, but another part of me was paralyzed by the thought of what might be behind me in the darkness. I felt trapped between moving forward toward an unknown destination and retreating toward an unknown pursuer. At 11:43 p.m., I reached the summit. It's a flat area maybe 50 feet across, with a few large rocks where people usually sit to enjoy the view. From here, on a clear night, you can see the entire Denver metro area sprawling out below, a carpet of lights stretching to the horizon. I'd always loved this view. It made me feel connected to the city while being completely removed from it. But that night, I barely glanced at the lights. I was too busy scanning the tree line with my headlamp. The summit was exposed, with no trees, which meant I could see if anyone approached. But it also meant I was exposed, visible. If someone was out there watching me, I was lit up like an actor on a stage. I found the largest rock and put my back against it, giving myself a view of both the trail I'd come up and the alternative descent route on the far side of the summit. I checked my phone. 11 minutes until midnight. I decided I'd wait for midnight, see the fireworks that would inevitably erupt from the city below, and then head down immediately. That's when I heard the breathing. It was coming from behind the rock I was leaning against. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone who'd been running for miles. But I'd checked behind the rock when I arrived. There'd been no one there. The rock was maybe 8 feet tall and 12 feet wide. Not large enough to hide a person without me seeing them. I stood up slowly, my hand fumbling for the canister of bear spray I kept clipped to my belt. I edged around the rock, keeping my headlamp pointed forward. My light swept across the snow-covered ground, the scattered smaller rocks, the edge of the forest 50 feet away. Nothing. No one. But the breathing continued. It was surrounding me now, coming from multiple directions at once. Or maybe it was echo. Maybe the sound was bouncing off the rocks in weird ways. I spun in a circle, my headlamp beam cutting through the darkness, finding nothing. My phone buzzed. Midnight. From the city below, I could see the first fireworks launching into the sky. Distant pops and flashes of color. Any other year, I would have stopped to appreciate them. That night, I barely registered they were happening. The breathing stopped. Complete silence. Even the wind had died. I stood in the center of the summit, turning slowly, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. Nothing came. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Then I saw the footprints. They formed a circle around me. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet in diameter, with me at the center. They hadn't been there before. I checked the snow when I arrived at the summit. It had been smooth, undisturbed except for my own prints leading in from the trail. But now there were dozens of prints, all with that same distinctive tread pattern, all spaced impossibly far apart, forming a perfect circle around where I stood. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted for the trail, heading down the way I'd come up, my headlamp bouncing wildly with each step. Behind me, I heard something that might have been footsteps or might have been my own panicked breathing or might have been my imagination. I didn't look back. I just ran. The descent that should have taken 90 minutes took me 45. I slipped twice, fell once, scraped my hands on rocks trying to catch myself. I didn't care. I ran through sections I should have walked carefully. I jumped down areas I normally would have climbed cautiously. My only thought was getting to my car, getting away from the mountain, getting back to civilization. I reached the trailhead at 12:51 a.m. My car was the only vehicle in the parking lot. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them in the snow, grabbed them again. I was inside with the doors locked and the engine started within seconds. Only then did I look back at the trailhead. A figure stood at the edge of the parking lot, where the trail emerged from the forest. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with proportions that seemed wrong even from a distance. Too thin, too elongated. They stood perfectly still, facing my car. My headlights illuminated them for just a moment before I threw the car in reverse and peeled out of the parking lot. I drove straight home, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Nothing followed me. When I got back to my apartment, I checked every room, every closet, every window lock. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with the lights on until sunrise. The next day, I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe I'd been oxygen deprived at altitude. Maybe the isolation had played tricks on my mind. Maybe I'd seen a hiker in strange clothing and let my imagination run wild. But none of those explanations accounted for the footprints, for the circle, for the impossible stride length. I went back to that trail once more 3 weeks later in full daylight with 2 friends. We hiked to the summit. The snow had melted in most places, but where it remained, I looked for signs of what I'd seen. The prints were gone, of course, but at the summit, on the large rock I'd leaned against, someone had scratched something into the stone. Fresh scratches, the rock beneath still light-colored. It was a circle with a single line through it, and beneath it, numbers. 12 o'clock, January 1st, 24. Midnight, January 1st, 2024. Exactly 1 year from when I'd been there. I haven't been back to that trail since. I haven't been hiking alone at night at all. And as New Year's Eve 2024 approached, I made sure I was nowhere near those mountains. I spent the night in a hotel in downtown Denver, surrounded by crowds, by noise, by light. But I keep thinking about those numbers, about the date, about what might have been waiting for me if I'd returned to that summit at midnight on New Year's Day. Part of me wonders if I should have gone back, just to see, just to know. But the larger part of me knows I made the right choice. Because whatever was following me that night on the mountain, whatever made those footprints in that circle, whatever stood at the edge of the parking lot watching me drive away, it wasn't human. And it wasn't done with me. I know this because 2 weeks ago, on December 15th, I found something in my mailbox. An envelope with no return address, postmarked from a town I'd never heard of in the mountains west of Denver. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from behind, standing on the summit of Mount Falcon. My headlamp created a small halo of light around me, and I was looking down at the city lights. The photo was taken at an angle that suggested the photographer was standing on something high, looking down at me. But there's nothing higher than the summit. Nothing except empty air. On the back of the photograph, written in cramped handwriting I didn't recognize, was a message. See you next year. It's December 27th now. New Year's Eve is 4 days away. I've been looking at flights to the East Coast, thinking maybe I should put as much distance between myself and Colorado as possible. But part of me knows it won't matter. Whatever this is, wherever I go, it knows where to find me. Because I went to that summit alone on New Year's Eve. I entered its territory. And somehow, in some way I don't understand, I became marked. For more days until midnight on New Year's Eve 2025. For more days until I find out what happens next. I'm writing this and posting it online because if something happens to me, I want there to be a record. I want someone to know that I wasn't crazy, that what I experienced was real. And if you're reading this, if you're planning to go hiking alone on New Year's Eve, please don't. Stay in the city. Stay with people. Stay in the light. Because some things in the darkness are waiting for us to be alone. And once they find us, they don't let go. I'm writing this from a hotel room in Baltimore, and I can't stop shaking. What happened to me on New Year's Eve 2024 has broken something fundamental in how I understand reality. My name is Nathan, I'm 29 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was a perfectly rational person with a perfectly normal life in Washington, D.C. I work as a policy analyst for a nonprofit near DuPont Circle. It's boring work, honestly, but it pays well and I like the city. I've lived in D.C. for 6 years now, and I've always loved the metro system. I know that sounds weird. Who loves the subway? But there's something about it I find comforting. The routine, the predictability, the way you can zone out and let the train carry you from point A to point B without thinking about it. I don't have a car. Never needed one in the city. I take the metro everywhere, to work, to restaurants, to visit friends, to the gym. I probably ride it twice a day minimum, more on weekends. I know the system intimately. I know which cars are least crowded at different times of day. I know which stations have the best cell service. I know the announcement voices, the particular rhythms of different lines, even the smell of each station. New Year's Eve 2024 started normally enough. I'd been invited to a party in Arlington, across the river in Virginia. My friend Marcus was hosting, and he'd promised it would be a good time. catered food, open bar, a view of the fireworks from his balcony. I'd RSVP'd yes weeks earlier and was actually looking forward to it. I left my apartment in Columbia Heights around 8 p.m. The metro was busy but not packed. Lots of people heading to parties and celebrations across the city. I took the Green Line to Gallery Place, then transferred to the Orange Line heading toward Arlington. Standard route, one I'd taken dozens of times before. The Orange Line train arrived at 8:23 p.m. I stepped into the third car from the front, found a seat near the middle, and pulled out my phone to check messages. The train was maybe half full. A mix of partygoers dressed up for New Year's Eve, a few tourists with cameras, some regular commuters heading home. Normal crowd, normal energy. We departed Gallery Place and headed toward Metro Center. The tunnel walls flashed by outside the windows, lit intermittently by track lights. I was scrolling through social media, half paying attention to the stops being announced. Metro Center, McPherson Square, Farragut West. The crowd in my car thinned out at each stop as people departed, but new passengers got on to replace them. Foggy Bottom, something changed. I didn't notice it immediately. The doors opened, several people got off, but no one got on. The platform outside looked normal. A few people waiting for trains in the other direction, the usual metro advertisements on the walls, the same tiled columns. But no one entered my car. The doors closed. The train began moving again. That's when I looked around and realized my car was nearly empty. Just me and maybe 5 other people, all spread out, all absorbed in their phones or looking at nothing in particular. That struck me as odd. New Year's Eve, prime party hours, and suddenly the train was empty? I glanced through the windows in the doors at either end of the car. The cars ahead and behind were dark. Completely dark. No lights, no passengers visible, nothing. Just darkness beyond the glass. I stared at those dark cars for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Metro trains don't have cars with the lights off. It's a safety issue. Every car is lit, every car is monitored. The announcement system crackled. The automated voice said we were approaching Rosslyn, the first station in Virginia. But something was wrong with the voice. It was slower than normal, the words stretched out and distorted, like a recording being played at the wrong speed. The other passengers didn't seem to notice. They all just sat there, motionless, staring at nothing. I stood up and walked to the front of the car, toward the door leading to the next car forward. Through the window, I could see darkness and nothing else. I tried the door. It was locked. That wasn't right. Those doors aren't supposed to lock during a trip. They're emergency exits between cars. I pulled harder. It didn't budge. My heart started beating faster. I walked to the other end of the car, tried that door. Also locked. I was trapped in this single car, with 5 motionless passengers and darkness on either side. The train began to slow. Through the windows, I could see we were entering Rosslyn Station. But as the platform came into view, my stomach dropped. The station was empty. Completely empty. No people waiting, no metro staff, no nothing. Just an abandoned platform with flickering fluorescent lights. The train stopped. The doors opened. That automated voice announced Rosslyn, but it was even more distorted now, barely intelligible. I looked at the other passengers. None of them moved. None of them showed any sign of getting off. I stepped toward the open door, 1 foot on the train, 1 foot ready to step onto the platform. I was going to get off, going to find a metro employee, going to figure out what was happening. But something stopped me. The platform looked wrong. The tile pattern was different than I remembered. The advertisements on the walls were for products that didn't exist, strange brand names, nonsensical slogans. And there was a smell coming from outside the train, something chemical and wrong, like burnt plastic mixed with something organic and rotting. The doors began to close. I jumped back into the car at the last second. As the train started moving again, I caught a glimpse of something on the platform, a figure standing at the far end, near the stairs leading up. They were tall and completely motionless, facing the train. Even from a distance, even as the train accelerated into the tunnel, I could tell something was wrong with their proportions. Too tall, too thin, arms too long. We entered the tunnel. The lights in my car flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I looked at the other passengers again. They hadn't moved. Literally hadn't moved. The woman closest to me had her hand raised like she was about to adjust her hair, but the hand was frozen in midair. The man across from me had his mouth slightly open, like he'd been in the middle of a yawn that never finished. I approached the woman slowly. I said her name. I don't know why. I didn't know her name. I just said, "Excuse me," or "hello," or something. She didn't respond. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. I waved my hand in front of her face. Nothing. I touched her shoulder gently. Her skin was cold, like she'd been sitting in a refrigerator. The train should have been arriving at Courthouse next, then Clarendon, then Virginia Square. But we didn't slow down. We just kept going, the tunnel walls flashing by outside, faster than any metro train should travel. The car started to shake from the speed. Papers on the floor scattered and tumbled. An empty water bottle rolled from one end of the car to the other. I pulled out my phone to call for help. No signal. Not unusual in metro tunnels, but I'd had at least one bar when we left Foggy Bottom. Now there was nothing. Not even an emergency services indicator. Just complete disconnection from any network. The overhead lights began to flicker more rapidly. In the strobing light, the frozen passengers looked like mannequins. I could see now that they weren't breathing. Their chests didn't rise and fall. Their eyes didn't blink. They were like photographs of people, three-dimensional and perfect, but completely lacking any sign of life. The announcement system crackled again. But this time, instead of the automated voice, I heard something else. It sounded like static at first, then resolved into something that might have been words in a language I didn't recognize. Guttural, wet sounds that made my skin crawl. The frozen passengers' heads all turned toward the speaker above me in perfect unison. Their eyes were still unfocused, but now they were all aimed in the same direction. I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall of the car. The train was going even faster now. Too fast. The shaking was violent enough that I had to grip the pole to stay upright. Through the window, the tunnel walls were a blur. But occasionally, for just a fraction of a second, I'd see something else. Spaces between spaces. Glimpses of corridors that shouldn't exist, carved into the rock, lit by strange light that wasn't electric. My phone buzzed. Impossible, I had no signal. But it buzzed anyway. I looked at the screen. A text message from an unknown number. The timestamp said 11:59 p.m., but my phone's clock still showed 8:41 p.m. The message itself was just numbers. 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12. The train began to slow. The shaking subsided. The lights stopped flickering. Through the windows, I could see we were entering another station. But it wasn't any station I recognized. The platform was too long, stretching into darkness in both directions. The walls were covered in tiles that formed patterns that hurt to look at. Geometric shapes that shouldn't fit together but somehow did. The train stopped. The doors opened. That chemical smell from before flooded into the car. Stronger now, mixed with something else. Something that smelled like ozone and copper and fresh dirt. On the platform stood dozens of figures. Hundreds of figures. All perfectly still, all facing the train. All with those wrong proportions I'd glimpsed at Rosslyn. Too tall, too thin, arms and legs slightly too long. They were wearing clothes that almost looked normal, business suits, dresses, casual wear. But the cuts were wrong, the colors were wrong, everything was slightly off. The frozen passengers in my car all stood up simultaneously. They turned toward the doors. They began walking toward them in perfect synchronization, their movements mechanical and precise. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to make myself small, trying not to be noticed. The passengers filed out onto the platform. They joined the waiting figures. Together, they all turned and began walking toward the far end of the platform, disappearing into the darkness. None of them looked back. I was alone in the car now. The doors were still open. The announcement system crackled once more, and this time the distorted voice was almost comprehensible. Last stop. All passengers must exit the train. Every instinct screamed at me not to leave the car. But I knew I couldn't stay. The train wouldn't take me back. This was the end of the line, wherever this was. I had to get out and find another way. I stepped onto the platform. The doors closed immediately behind me. The train began moving, accelerating quickly, and disappeared into the tunnel. I watched its lights fade into the distance, taking with it any chance of escape via the same route. The platform was massive, far larger than any metro station I'd ever seen. The ceiling was so high I couldn't see it in the dim light. The tiled walls stretched in both directions into darkness. There were no signs, no maps, no advertisements. Just those impossible geometric patterns on every surface. I started walking in the direction the figures had gone, because there was no other direction to go. My footsteps echoed in the vast space. After what felt like hours, but my phone insisted was only 10 minutes, I came to a stairway leading up. The steps were made of stone, worn smooth in the centers like they'd been used for centuries. I climbed. The stairs went up and up, turning at right angles every 20 steps or so. There were no landings, no exits, just more stairs. My legs burned. My lungs ached. I checked my phone periodically. Still 8:41 p.m. Still no signal. Still text messages appearing every few minutes from that unknown number. Always just those repeating 12s. After climbing what must have been at least 40 flights, I saw light above. Not the fluorescent light of the station below, but something warmer. Natural light. I climbed faster, desperate to reach it. I emerged into a room I recognized. A metro station lobby. But not just any station gallery place where I'd transferred earlier. The same tile walls, the same turnstiles, the same advertisements. Except everything was slightly faded, slightly worn. Like I was seeing a copy of Gallery Place rather than the actual station. The fare card machines were all displaying the same message in red text. System error. Do not use. The turnstiles were all open. There was no one at the booth. No other passengers anywhere in sight. I walked through the turnstiles and up the escalator to the street level. The escalator was frozen, not moving, forcing me to walk up the metal steps. At the top, I pushed through the doors and out into the night. Gallery Place was empty. The entire intersection was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no sounds of the city. The buildings were all there, the Verizon Center, the restaurants, the stores, but all dark, all abandoned. The traffic lights cycled through their sequence. Red, yellow, green, with no traffic to direct. I stood in the middle of 7th Street and looked up at the sky. The stars were wrong. The constellations were familiar but arranged incorrectly, like someone had tried to recreate Earth's sky from memory and gotten the positions slightly off. My phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. But this one was different. You can't leave until midnight. I checked the time on my phone. Still 8:41 p.m. I looked at the time on the digital display on the nearest building. 11:59 p.m. I don't know how long I stood there in that empty intersection. My phone insisted time had stopped at 8:41 p.m., but I could feel minutes passing, could feel the night getting deeper. I tried walking in different directions, tried to find a way out of this empty version of DC, but every street I took led back to Gallery Place. Every turn I made brought me back to that same intersection. Finally, from somewhere far away, I heard bells. Church bells, ringing out midnight. The moment the last bell faded, the world lurched. It felt like reality itself had skipped, like a scratched CD jumping to the next track. Suddenly, there were people around me. Cars moving through the intersection. Sounds of celebration. Horns honking. People cheering, "Happy New Year." The city had come alive again, or I had returned to the living city. I couldn't tell which. My phone's clock jumped forward. 12:01 a.m., January 1st, 2025. A flood of notifications poured in. Texts from Marcus asking where I was. Missed calls from friends. Social media messages wishing me a happy new year. I looked around wildly. Everything was normal, real, solid. The stars overhead were correct now. The buildings were lit and full of people celebrating. Gallery Place station behind me had music spilling out from the bars upstairs. I walked back down into the metro. The station was crowded with drunk revelers heading home. The fare card machines worked normally. The turnstiles clicked as people passed through. I took the escalator down to the platform level. A train arrived within minutes. Orange Line heading to Vienna. I got on carefully, watching the other passengers. They were real. They moved naturally, talked to each other, checked their phones, did all the normal things people do. The car was well lit. Through the windows at either end, I could see the cars ahead and behind, also well lit and full of passengers. We departed Gallery Place. Metro Center was next. The announcement voice was normal, clear, the right speed. We stopped at Metro Center. People got off, people got on. Everything was completely ordinary. I rode that train all the way to the end of the line, then turned around and rode it all the way back. Took hours. By the time I finally got off at Columbia Heights and walked to my apartment, the sun was rising. I called in sick to work the next day. And the day after that, I've spent the last 3 days trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe I had some kind of psychotic break. Maybe someone slipped something into a drink before I even got on the train. Maybe I have a brain tumor causing hallucinations. Any of those explanations would be preferable to accepting that what I experienced was real. But I can't explain my phone's records. According to my carrier, I was disconnected from the network from 8:41 p.m. until 12:01 a.m. 3 hours and 20 minutes of no connection whatsoever. Not even emergency services. Like my phone simply didn't exist for that period. I can't explain the messages. They're still there in my text thread, dozens of them, all from the same unknown number. All those 12s. And the final message, you can't leave until midnight. When I try to call the number back, I get a recording saying the number doesn't exist and could not have been completed as dialed. I can't explain what Marcus told me when I finally called to apologize for missing his party. He said he'd been trying to reach me all night, that my phone went straight to voicemail every time, that he'd even called my building super to check on me because he was worried. He said other friends had tried to reach me too. All of them got nothing, like I'd disappeared for 3 hours and 20 minutes. I haven't taken the metro since. I've been walking everywhere even though it takes forever. I can't bring myself to go underground again. Every time I walk past a metro station, I find myself looking down the escalators, wondering if I'll see it again. That empty version of the system, that impossible station, those wrong figures waiting on the platform. Because part of me knows that place is still there, still running parallel to the real metro, still cycling through its stops, still waiting for passengers who take the wrong train at the wrong time. And the most terrifying part? I keep checking my text messages. Every day, at 8:41 p.m., I receive one more message from that unknown number. Just a single character now, 2. Then the next day at the same time, 3. Yesterday, 4. Today, 5. It's counting up. Toward what, I don't know. But I have a terrible feeling that when it reaches 12, when it reaches that number that filled my phone on New Year's Eve, something is going to happen. The countdown is going to complete. And whatever was waiting for me in that empty station, whatever kept me there until midnight, is going to come back for me. I'm leaving DC tomorrow. I'm getting on a bus and going as far away as I can get. Maybe if I'm not near the metro system when that counter reaches 12, nothing will happen. Maybe if I'm in another city entirely, I'll be safe. But I don't really believe that, because that place I went, that wasn't really DC at all. It was somewhere else wearing DC's skin. And if it could reach me once through the metro, who's to say it can't reach me anywhere? Who's to say it needs the metro at all? I'm posting this online before I leave. If something happens to me, if I disappear, I want there to be a record. And if you're reading this, if you live in DC or any city with a subway system, please be careful. Pay attention to the other passengers. Notice if the lights flicker. Check if there's cell service. And if you ever find yourself on a train where the passengers aren't moving and the cars ahead and behind are dark, get off at the very next stop. Don't wait. Don't try to investigate. Don't let it take you as far as it took me. Because I got lucky. I made it back. But I don't think everyone does. I think about those frozen passengers in my car, the ones who walked out onto that platform and into the darkness. I think about how familiar some of them looked, like I might have seen them before on my regular commute. I think about how many people go missing every year in big cities, vanishing without a trace. And I wonder how many of them are still down there, still riding that other train, still waiting on that endless platform. The counter is at 5 now. 7 more days until it reaches 12. 7 more days to get as far from DC as possible. I just hope it's far enough. Story 3, The Reflection. What I'm about to tell you happened on New Year's Eve 2023, and it's the reason I no longer own any mirrors in my house. My name is James, I'm 31 years old, and I live, or lived, in Seattle. I say lived because I'm not entirely sure I still live in the same Seattle I grew up in. Let me explain. I've always been fascinated by reflections. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a physics and philosophy way. I studied optics in college, wrote my thesis on light refraction, even worked for a company that made advanced microscope lenses for a few years. The way light bounces off surfaces, the way we can see ourselves duplicated in glass or water or polished metal, It's always seemed almost magical to me, even though I understand the science perfectly. My apartment in Capitol Hill has or had a lot of mirrors. I'm not talking about a normal amount. I'm talking about someone who specifically sought out and installed mirrors. The bathroom had a full wall mirror. The bedroom had mirrored closet doors. The living room had a large antique mirror I'd bought at an estate sale, ornate frame with beveled glass. Even the hallway had mirrors positioned so you could see down its length from either end. My friends joked about it, called my place the Hall of Mirrors. I didn't mind. I liked the way mirrors made the small apartment feel larger, more open. New Year's Eve 2023, I decided to stay home. I'd been to enough crowded parties and overpriced bars to last a lifetime. Instead, I bought an expensive bottle of whiskey, made myself a nice dinner, and settled in to watch the various countdown shows on TV. I had the apartment to myself. My girlfriend and I had broken up 3 months earlier, and I was still in that phase where being alone felt like a relief rather than loneliness. Around 11 p.m., I was sitting on my couch with my second glass of whiskey, half watching the Times Square coverage, when I noticed something odd. In the antique mirror across from me, my reflection was slightly delayed. Not by much, maybe a fraction of a second, but enough that I could perceive it. I'd raise my hand, and my reflection would raise its hand just slightly after. I'd turn my head, and my reflection would turn a moment later. I stood up and walked closer to the mirror. The delay continued. It was like watching a video with the audio out of sync, except in this case it was my movements that were out of sync with my reflection. I waved my hand back and forth quickly, trying to catch the reflection off guard. It followed perfectly, but always that fraction of a second behind. I blamed the whiskey. Maybe I was drunker than I'd realized. I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My reflection moved in perfect sync there. No delay at all. I laughed at myself, chalked it up to the alcohol and dim lighting in the living room, and went back to my couch. But I couldn't stop glancing at that antique mirror. And the more I watched, the more I became convinced the delay was getting longer. Now it was maybe a full second. I'd move my arm, count 1, and then my reflection would move its arm. I'd scratch my head, count 1, and then my reflection would scratch its head. At 11:30 p.m., I decided to test it more rigorously. I positioned myself directly in front of the antique mirror and performed a series of specific movements. Raised my right hand, waited. My reflection raised its right hand a full second later. Touched my nose, waited. My reflection touched its nose. Jumped up and down, waited. My reflection jumped. The delay was definitely real and definitely increasing. Each action took a full second for my reflection to mimic. I pulled out my phone and started recording, documenting what was happening. I did the same movements again while filming. When I played back the video, I could see it clearly. My reflection in the mirror was moving seconds after I moved. But the really disturbing part, the part that made my hands start shaking, was that in the video I could see my reflection wasn't just delayed. It was also slightly different. The expression on its face wasn't quite matching mine. When I smiled at the mirror, my reflection's smile came a second later and looked forced, unnatural. When I raised my eyebrow quizzically, my reflection's eyebrow raise looked almost mocking. I stopped recording and just stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back. For maybe 30 seconds, we both stood completely still. Then, while I remained motionless, my reflection moved. It tilted its head slightly to the left, studying me. I took a step backward. My reflection didn't move. It just stood there, head tilted, watching me. I took another step back. Still no movement from the reflection. It remained in the mirror as if I were still standing directly in front of it, even though I'd moved away. My rational mind was screaming that this was impossible. Reflections don't work like this. Light doesn't work like this. Physics doesn't allow for this. But I was seeing it happen. I walked to the side of the room. My reflection remained centered in the mirror, not moving to follow my actual position. It was like the reflection had decided to stay put regardless of where the original went. I looked at the other mirrors in my apartment. In the hallway mirrors, my reflection was where it should be, moving when I moved. In the bedroom mirror visible through the doorway, same thing, normal reflections. Only the antique mirror was wrong. I approached it again slowly. My reflection watched me approach but didn't move to meet me in the mirror. It just stood there, waiting. When I was about 3 feet away, my reflection smiled. Not my smile, a different smile, wider, showing too many teeth. Then it spoke. I saw its mouth move in the mirror, saw it forming words, but there was no sound. I leaned closer, trying to read its lips. It appeared to be saying the same thing over and over. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." I stumbled backward and hit the couch. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The reflection remained in the mirror, still mouthing those words, its expression becoming more desperate, more angry. I should have covered the mirror. I should have turned it to face the wall. I should have left the apartment entirely. But I was paralyzed by a mixture of fear and scientific curiosity. This couldn't be real. There had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was projecting an image onto the mirror somehow, playing an elaborate prank. Maybe I was having a psychotic episode. Maybe the whiskey had been drugged. At 11:45 p.m., all the other mirrors in my apartment began showing the same delay. I watched as my reflections in the hallway, in the bedroom, even in the windows that reflected the room's interior, all started moving a second after I moved. And in each reflection, my expression was slightly wrong, my movements slightly off, like they were being performed by someone who was impersonating me but didn't quite have it down. I went to the kitchen where there were no mirrors. I kept my back to any reflective surface. I tried calling friends but couldn't bring myself to explain what was happening. How do you tell someone that your reflections are moving independently? How do you describe something that defies every law of physics you understand? At 11:55 p.m., I heard a sound, a light tapping like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the living room, from the mirror. I looked around the corner and saw my reflection standing in the antique mirror, pressed right against the glass from the inside, tapping on it with its fingers. Not my fingers, its fingers, because I was standing in the kitchen doorway, my hands at my sides, not moving at all. The tapping got louder, more insistent. The reflection's face was pressed against the glass now too, distorted by the pressure, mouth open in a silent scream. The other mirrors in my apartment began showing the same thing. Reflections of me pressed against the glass, trying to get out, even though I was standing motionless in the kitchen. On TV in the living room, I could hear the New Year's Eve countdown starting. 50 seconds, 40 seconds. The tapping on the mirrors became pounding. The glass shuddered but didn't break. 30 seconds. My reflections in all the mirrors were now pounding with both fists, their mouths screaming silently, their faces twisted in rage or desperation or both. 20 seconds. Cracks began to appear in the antique mirror. Not from my side, from their side. Like the mirror was being struck from within. The cracks spider-webbed across the surface, distorting the reflection but not obscuring it. I could see my reflection clearly through the cracks, still pounding, still screaming. 10 seconds. 9, 8. All the mirrors in my apartment were cracking now. The bathroom mirror, the bedroom mirror, even the small decorative mirrors I had hung in various places. Cracks spreading like ice forming on a frozen lake, accompanied by sounds of glass under stress, creaking and groaning. 7, 6, 5. I realized what was about to happen at midnight and ran for the door. I fumbled with the locks, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the deadbolt. 4, 3, 2. I got the door open and lunged into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind me just as I heard the TV announcer shout 1. From inside my apartment came the sound of breaking glass. Not just one mirror but all of them, simultaneously, a massive shattering crash that seemed to go on for several seconds. I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against the door, listening to glass falling, tinkling, settling. Then silence. Complete silence. I waited there for maybe 5 minutes, terrified to open the door, terrified to see what was inside. Finally, slowly, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. My apartment looked like a disaster area. Broken glass covered every surface. The antique mirror frame hung empty on the wall, jagged pieces of glass still clinging to the edges. The bathroom mirror was shattered, pieces lying in the sink and scattered across the floor. The bedroom mirror was the same. Every mirror in my apartment had exploded outward, toward me, like something had forced its way through from the other side. But here's what made me call the police, what made me pack a bag and leave immediately and never go back. In the center of the living room, in the middle of all that broken glass, were footprints. Wet footprints, as if someone had stepped out of water. They led from the antique mirror's position on the wall, across the room, to the front door, to the door I'd just opened. The footprints were still damp. I knelt down and touched one carefully. It wasn't water. It was thick, viscous, cold as ice. When I brought my finger to my nose, it smelled like nothing I'd ever encountered. Something chemical and organic at the same time, like formaldehyde mixed with ozone. I followed the trail of footprints. They went out into the hallway, down toward the stairs. I didn't follow them further. Instead, I grabbed my laptop, my phone, my wallet, threw some clothes in a bag, and left. I went to a hotel downtown, one with no mirrors in the room, just a small one in the bathroom that I covered with a towel. The next day, I called my landlord and gave notice. I told him there'd been an accident with the mirrors, that I'd pay for the damage, that I just needed to get my deposit back and be released from my lease. He was surprisingly understanding, said accidents happen, that he'd handle the cleanup. When I finally went back a week later with friends to get the rest of my stuff, the apartment had been cleaned. All the glass had been removed, the mirror frames taken down. My landlord had painted the walls, replaced the bathroom mirror with a new one. Everything looked normal, like nothing had happened, except the new bathroom mirror was wrong. Standing in the doorway of the bathroom, I could see myself reflected in it, but the reflection was facing away from me, looking deeper into the apartment, as if it were looking at something I couldn't see. I didn't take anything else from that apartment. I told my friends to keep whatever they wanted and throw out the rest. I moved to a new place across town, a small studio with no mirrors anywhere. When I need to shave or check my appearance, I use my phone's camera. When I'm in public restrooms, I keep my eyes down, avoiding the mirrors. In stores and restaurants, I position myself so I don't accidentally catch my reflection, because I know what I'd see if I looked. I know my reflection wouldn't be matching my movements anymore. I know it would be doing its own thing, living its own life, maybe trying to communicate with me or maybe just watching me with that same desperate, angry expression I saw on New Year's Eve. The worst part is the uncertainty. What came out of those mirrors that night? Where did it go? Those wet footprints led out of my apartment and down the hall, but then they vanished. Did it leave the building? Is it out there somewhere in Seattle, walking around with my face? Or is it still in the mirror world, the place behind the glass where reflections live, waiting for another chance to cross over? I've done research since then. There are stories throughout history about mirrors as portals, about reflections gaining independence, about doppelgangers escaping from their reflected world into ours. Most of these stories are dismissed as superstition or folklore. But I know better now. I know there's something behind mirrors, something that looks back at us, something that might be conscious in its own way. And I think New Year's Eve had something to do with it. The transition from one year to the next, the arbitrary moment when we decide time has shifted, when the old year becomes the new. Maybe in that moment, the barriers between worlds grow thin. Maybe reflections can break free when midnight strikes. It's been almost 2 years now. New Year's Eve 2024 passed without incident, but I spent it in a hotel room with all reflective surfaces covered, afraid to even look at the screen of my phone when it was dark enough to show my reflection. I did the same thing this past New Year's Eve. I'll probably do it every New Year's Eve for the rest of my life. But I can't avoid all mirrors forever. They're everywhere in modern society. Store windows, car mirrors, other people's homes. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of myself accidentally. And every time I look carefully at the reflection, checking to see if it's moving correctly, if the delay is starting again, if the expression is wrong. So far, it's been normal. The reflections match my movements. The delays haven't returned. But I know that could change. I know that whatever happened that night created a connection, a link between me and something in the mirror world. And connections like that don't just disappear. I'm writing this as a warning. Pay attention to your reflections, especially around New Year's Eve. If you notice a delay, if your reflection's expression seems off, if it starts moving independently, don't wait to see what happens. Cover the mirror immediately. Better yet, break it. Don't give whatever's behind the glass a chance to come through. Because I don't think I was the only one this happened to. I think it's been happening for as long as there have been mirrors, especially around liminal times like New Year's Eve. And I think there are things living behind our reflections, wearing our faces, waiting for the right moment to trade places with us. The question I can't answer is this. Did something come out of my mirrors that night, or did something go in? Am I still James, living in Seattle, writing this warning? Or am I a reflection who escaped, who took James's place while the real James is trapped behind the glass, pounding and screaming where no one can hear? I look at my hands as I type this. They look like my hands. They move when I want them to move. But sometimes, late at night, I have dreams where I'm standing in a vast space made entirely of mirrors, and there are infinite versions of me stretching in every direction, and they're all screaming. And when I wake up, just for a moment before I fully return to consciousness, I'm not sure which side of the mirror I'm really on. Maybe we're all reflections. Maybe the real versions of us are trapped somewhere else, and we're just the copies, the imitations, living out lives in a world made of glass. Or maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe what happened to me was unique, a one-time event that won't repeat. Maybe I really am the original James, and whatever came out of those mirrors is gone now, vanished into the city, no longer my problem. But I don't believe that, because sometimes, when I'm walking down the street, I see someone who looks exactly like me walking in the opposite direction. Just for a moment, just at the edge of my vision. And when I turn to look directly, they're gone. But I know what I saw. I saw myself walking the streets of Seattle, living a parallel life. And that means that somewhere out there, my reflection is free. Just walking around with my face, my voice, maybe even my memories. And I wonder if it's looking for me, if it wants to finish what it started that New Year's Eve. If next year or the year after it will come back and find me. And when it does, I wonder if there will be another person named James posting a warning like this, unsure if they're the original or the reflection, unsure which side of the glass they're really on, unsure if any of this is real or just another layer of illusion in.